Victorious, victorious. Erastus, necessitas. Horarius, despondeo. Spiritus Domino. Patriarcha Gladiator. Offictio Divinitas salutaris, votivas libertas.
All right. Good evening, everyone. How are we doing tonight? It's been quite the evening already, I see. Live is good. It's a great place to start. So, I don't know if you've been on Twitter the last couple of days. It's buck wild. Um, First of all, the increasingly resembling a flightless bird, a flightless and featherless bird, Brianna Wu got on Twitter today to talk about how it's the 10th anniversary of Gamergate, because she can't let Gamergate out of her head. And she goes on in a very long tweet that proves that Twitter Blue was a mistake. Turns around and says, yeah, Gamergate's why I'm not in video game design anymore. And I just want to say, no, the reason Brianna Wu isn't in video game design anymore is because she turned around, made a video game that no one wanted to play with 14 concurrent players on Steam as an all-time high. Actually, I think it was 12. And alienated everyone who she worked with. She failed at it. The reason you're not in video game development anymore is you failed. Let me know if you can hear me. Let me know if I'm coming through clearly or just as bad as usual. The other thing that got announced today is, well, this. Whoop. Yep, too small. Still too big. Two Russia Today employees indicted for covertly funding and directing U.S. company that published thousands of videos in furtherance of Russian interests. Employees of Russian state-controlled media outlet deployed nearly $10 million to publish Russia Today curated content, which garnered millions of views to a Tennessee-based online content creation company. Among these was Tim Pool, who got apparently a significant amount of money and can't afford hair. An indictment charging Russian nationals Konstantin Kalishnikov, 31, also known as Kostya, and Elena, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, 27, also known as Elena, with conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act and conspiracy to commit money excuse me, was unsealed today in the Southern District of New York. Kalishnikov and A are at large. The Justice Department has charged two employees of RT, a Russian state-controlled media outlet, in a $10 million scheme to create and distribute content to U.S. audience with hidden Russian government messaging, said Merrick Garland. The Justice Department will not tolerate attempts by an authoritarian regime to exploit our country's free exchange of ideas in order to covertly further its own propaganda efforts, and our investigation into this matter remains ongoing. So we have talked about with the commander in the past how Russia works to manipulate social media. The indictment is available online. Here, let me do this. Boop. There you go. The process is something called liminal warfare. And there's a paper by Edward Kekillen on it. But the idea is that you can attack a country without directly attacking it in a way that they cannot legitimately respond through normal military means. And this is how they do it. And it's become the primary way that they do this. They insert stories in the social media in order to try to advance Russian interests or to sow discord and discontent. So I want to focus on Tim Pool for a minute and his little beanie. Tim Pool will run around constantly talking about, oh, there's going to be a civil war. There's going to be a civil war. There's going to be a civil war. This isn't an organic opinion. It's a The fake opinion is what it is. It's something he's being told to say, to spread, to foment the concept, excuse me, that Tim Pool is telling you that Americans hate each other. We're going to fight. That the divides between us are too big and powerful and strong to really be understood, or like there's no way to bridge the gap. And the idea isn't to get Americans to start fighting a civil war. The idea is to get you to disengage from one another. So the whole point, the whole idea behind our collective society is that we work together to further solve problems. If we are fighting about the price of tea in China, we are not fighting Russian influence in Ukraine. The concept is so that you look with suspicion to the guy next to you. And the other way they do this is they create fake social media profiles. Not bots so much as humans running multiple accounts designed to create the impression of a consensus of conflict. One of those attempts you saw earlier last year was the Texas Brexit thing, where you had a whole bunch of Russian accounts that accidentally were really bad at their jobs, trying to make you think there's this massive movement of people in Texas who want to secede from the Union. And like one of them put in their tweet, yeah, Texas has a warm water port, a phrase used by no American ever. And that's kind of how they got caught. Covert attempts to sow division and trick Americans into unwittingly consuming foreign propaganda represents attacks on our democracy, said FBI Director Christopher A. Wray. And he's right. This concept is going to cause people to not want to engage. So the way that the Russians Trump colluded with the Russians is gave them polling information, which helped them target their attacks. And they purchased it through other firms and whatnot. There was other methods. And they could target their social media attacks. And all they have to do, they don't have to hack a voting machine or get illegitimate votes cast. All they have to do is get a legitimate voter to not engage with the election and not vote if that voter is a Democrat. And all they have to do is spread enraging things to Republicans that make them want to vote. That's how you can manipulate an election. It doesn't require you to do anything that leaves a trace. It just requires you take our algorithmically generated outrage machine and target it in just the right way to get the person you want to act and get the person you don't want to act to not act. And this is a pretty novel thing, obviously. Social media is a new thing. But the concept of exploiting the division between in societies, those inherent divisions, isn't new. It's quite old, as a matter of fact. Oh, there you are. Born and raised in Texas, lived here for all my 27 years. Actually, most you get as well. We did it this one time, or special. Yeah, and it didn't go well at that first time, to be perfectly frank. The idea of exploiting divisions is not new. KGB agents would talk about it. Defector and KGB agents would talk about it, for example. The idea is a long-held, beloved process for Russia. And the weapon, though, is new. At least it's coming of age now. This concept of social media and content creators and influencers. That is very much very much a new method. And like, for what it's worth, the content creators in question claim they didn't know. I kind of feel like that's bull. How do you not know that you are not advancing the interests of Americans? Like, there's what you can prove and put in an indictment and get a jury to believe. But come on. You have to know. You have to recognize that what you're saying is bullcrap. Have to know. Like, you can't just go, oh, I get this money to say this specific thing. I wonder who wants me to say that thing. Like, this is why that creators have to put up the paid contents thing on YouTube, so that you know that it's paid content. That way you can see and look at and say, oh, this section here is for on behalf of someone and represents an ad. And I think this is important because we have an understanding of ads. We watch them all the time here in the States, but we don't necessarily have the same relationship with YouTube and the content creator space that we do with a television show, because we recognize when someone drinks a Pepsi in a TV show, they're trying to sell us Pepsi. But YouTube, to famously riff off of the Lindsay Ellis video, is about authenticity. The difference between consuming media on a traditional television show or movie, and the difference here is there's a different relationship between me, the streamer, and you, the viewer, and it's one that is not as separate. So, like, for example, it's not beyond the pale to we talk about parasociality. It's not beyond the pale to imagine that a person feels about a streamer a different way than they might feel about a movie star. In fact, usually when someone imagines themselves as having a relationship with a movie star, for example, they're nuts. The thing about a streamer, though, is like this is interactive. I read chat, I see what you say, you can type things and say things to me, we interact, which creates a different level of like interaction, right? It's a whole different way of enacting, and it creates a different like link. So like it's important to kind of separate what's the HelloFresh ad and what's the sure for you can subscribe to my OnlyFans. It's just me sitting there reading. It's important to make a line of separation between what's paid advertisement and space. Side note: if I could actually make money on OnlyFans reading, there'd be something deeply wrong with the world. Have the head down, or the head up, rather. But this highlights something, I think. I like to talk about engaging with media critically. And this is going to kind of segue into our next bit, too. I'm not going to go forever tonight. The social media landscape is designed to show you things that you will engage with. And it prioritizes things that make people angry over things that people find spark joy. Like, I keep trying to get my Twitter feed to stop showing me like genocidal Zionists, and it's not working well. it's easy to get yourself in a position where you imagine that people are generally bad. But everywhere I go where I talk to, like, make a casual conversation with people, and they ask you, well, what do you do in your spare time? And I have a lot of it because I'm disabled, right? Like, oh yeah, I run a small YouTube channel about history and politics. Like, oh, that's so cool. They want to talk about it. Like, people want to interact and they want to connect. And social media, for all of its advantages, can create for us an environment in which we forget this, and we forget that there are people who out there who will genuinely value that thing you do, who and through that your identity and you. It becomes very easy to sit in the spaces, in these spaces, and just see all of the hate fomenting around you, and to lose sight of the fact that that's not the majority of people. I fell victim to that over the last couple of weeks. That's why I haven't streamed as much. I kind of lost my ability to separate the fiction of social media from the reality of people. And it was weighing on my mind. I was having a really hard time with it because all evidence to the contrary, me being a grumpy old asshole, I want to like people. I want to engage with them in genuine ways and to see different perspectives, and I filter that through my understanding that some opinions are more robust and soundly formed than others. And when you see all these bad opinions and these cruel concepts being thrown out by people with casual disregard for outrage clicks, it can be very easy to kind of get a little depressed, right? Situational depression. And I guess I just wanted to remind everyone that that's not the way the world works. That's the way tech bros have tried to make the world work. That is a cat. Yes, thank you. That is the way tech bros have tried to make the world look like it works. And speaking of tech bros and making the world look like it works, the most stupid discourse I could have ever imagined came up on Twitter again. I gotta get off Twitter. I need to take the Brooks and Sunday route and dive out. Tucker Carlson did an interview with a weirdo. That's all Tucker Carlson's interviews, to be perfectly frank. Who said that Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II. Now, Winston Churchill was not a good man. He was kind of a little bit of a shit. And Hitler is not a good man. He was a kind of a very big shit. But this sparked a series of discussions, two kind of parallel ones. The first was people trying to justify this position that Winston Churchill caused World War II by not appeasing Germany properly in the 30s. Which is a buck wild position on several levels. First of all, Winston Churchill was not prime minister in the 30s. Winston Churchill was a very unpopular backbenching MP. Second of all, it's fairly well known that Chamberlain, who was the prime minister in the late 30s, took extreme steps to appease Hitler, such as the Munich Agreement. So, the provocative actions of the United States that were directed towards the Germans in the early portion of the war. Like someone brought up Destroyers for Bases, which was a program in which the United States took custody of a number of British territorial bases in exchange for a series of old aging destroyers to escort convoys across the Atlantic. Was when the war had already started. So I'm not sure where they were getting that from. But the more disturbing element of this was these people who were trying to argue that Churchill was the good guy and Hitler was the bad guy, and perhaps even more disturbing, other people arguing the converse, that Hitler was a good guy and Churchill was a bad guy. And I want to talk a little bit about why it's not useful to think about history in the terms of good and bad guys. The concept of a good guy or a hero and conversely a villain are artifacts of stories, legends, and myths. They're elements of these things. They are central to that idea of telling a myth. And if you turn around and you've watched my show with Zanzi, we talk a little bit about myth making versus history. Myths are semi-foundational to countries. They aren't history, though. The problem with having a villain in a tale of history is that you elevate this person beyond what they are into this kind of figure of mustache twirling evil, a person who can do wrong not because they are making a choice and evaluating a position and choosing to harm others, but they are wrong because they cannot be anything but wrong. They cannot be anything but evil. So, like, you'll hear people like Vosh misuse this term a lot, ontological evil. And ontology refers to a branch of philosophy called metaphysics, in which we talk about the way the thing must be. It has to be this way and no other way. It's generally used as a format for very early argument for the existence of God, or a theological argument for the existence of God. Imagine a being of perfection that is the ultimate good, the greatest possible being. And what would make this being more good is if this being was real. And that's kind of like a very bastardized version of the ontological argument for the existence of God. But it's kind of the misuse of the term is problematic. I hate it. I'll yell at people who misuse ontological or use it in a sentence without referring to theology, because it doesn't fit. People aren't metaphysically anything. They are, first of all, very physical and very real. And second of all, their natures are not determinate. They cannot be the thing simply because they must be no other thing. So, and Hannah Arendt talks about this, the banality of evil, when she's talking about Eichmann's trial, is he is a person. He has hopes, fears, dreams. He is real. Yes, the perfect island argument. He is real. He's not larger than his argument. So the problem is people choose to do these things. Hitler chose to direct people to enact the final solution. They chose to invade Poland. They chose to murder Poles. They chose to do these things. And every layer down the way, different people had to make choices. They didn't do those things because they could do no other thing. They did those things because they chose to. And it's important that we remember that. It's important that we remember that they chose to do it because it tells us that we could do it too if the circumstances are just right. The line between being a good person and a bad person is not some metaphysical realm out there. The line is a choice that you make in the moment. You choose to help another person. You choose to harm another person. It is a way of taking away agency from the people of the past by trying to ascribe to them being good, bad, evil, or wrong or right. No, wrong or right's different. I misspoke. They are people who chose to do a thing, and we should understand those choices. We should understand those choices so that we know not to make them. And conversely, we should understand people not in the framework of being heroes because they are elevated above the events of the time. We should understand that as a choice they make. That a person chooses to run into a burning building and save people. They weren't metaphysically destined to do it. We have a certain level of control. And I think that's vital to understanding history. Because as much as you might ever be one step away from being the banal evil person, you're also just a step in the opposite direction away from being a heroic person. And if we lose sight of that, we, particularly those of us who are leftists, lose. Because I'll be honest with you, I look around and the field's getting a little sparse. There ain't a lot of us that are, waving the flag the way they're supposed to these days. And it's going to get harder and harder to convince people that these are ideas worth pursuing, worth doing, and that they matter. And I'll be honest, if we start from a place that creates irredeemable monsters that are evil, that can be nothing else but evil, then we run the risk of deciding that we can't convince people to begin with. That we can't convince people that you can make the things around you better. That you just sit there and stew and say that the world is going to close in around you until the capitalist grind consumes you. And conversely, if we imagine some people as just good, then it's hard to criticize them in an honest fashion, and that kind of leads to the creation of those Tylers and the unexamined people who wear the skin of leftism instead of embodying it. Also, I have been advised, and I'm supposed to tell people to hydrate more. So hydrate, drink water. And there is kind of, I think, the a weakness that we have to kind of address. I see a lot of people choose the way they interact with others designed to keep themselves safe, and I can understand that in a real world setting where you evaluate a person and say, person is X. I'm going to choose not to be around them. Online is different. Um, we have a genuine chance here to talk to people, and if we start from the ontological evil standpoint, then there's no point in even trying to change minds, or ontologically good for that matter. These things are what they are, and they will run their course, and that's not an effective way to advocate for anyone. So like, have a good one, Vic. The concept is I want to get at with all this, these two segments, I think, is believe in other people. Take your licks when you can, and when it turns out to be wrong, but don't lose that belief in other people because it's going to matter for us. All right. I owe everyone theory. Tonight, We're going to talk about Henry Anton Jomini's book, The Art of War, at least the first chapter. So that is what we are going to do when we come back. Everybody go, take a little walk, stretch out. I know we came off Sunday stream for most of us. We'll be back in a few minutes. And everyone hear me again. How we doing? My back. Cal, it feels hard not to go doomer sometimes. Well, I want to talk about that real quick before we move on. I get it. Here is what I tell people. And it's kind of a relation to my kidney disease thing. I was diagnosed with my kidney disease when I was 18. So it's been a while. A long while. It's been over a decade now. 18 to 28 would be a decade. We're almost to 2 decades. And I'm 30. I'm going to be 36 this year. There are times when I feel bad. There are times when I feel pain, when I feel sick, and it closes in around you, right? And that's kind of the same thing with doomerism, right? It closes in around you, and it feels like there's nothing that will be past that. When that happens to me, I remind myself that I will not feel this way forever. And that is the kind of the thing that you push on for, right? If that makes sense. Bad feelings are temporary. Oh, we just died. Thanks, Sunday. I love you. All right, let's get on with this. So, Jomini. Why are we talking about Jomini, and who the hell is he? Is a better question to start with. Antoine Henry Jomini was a Swiss man who served in the Napoleonic Wars, first on the side of France, and then on the side of Russia. What a twist! And he's kind of notable for writing a book. The translated title is The Art of War, which is, again, not wholly original. Which is the book I have pinned for you at the top of the page. Now that chat has let me move that stupid thing. And Jomini is unique, at least for American military historians and officers, because for a very long time, he was the only book on warfare that most Americans would read. For example, this translation of this book should be from 1862 for West Point. And that is going to be, basically how all of the big generals of the Civil War learned their trade, is through reading this book. So it stands alongside Clausewitz on War as kind of one of the seminal texts of military theory for Europe. And in it, much like on War, you're going to have, and at the beginning, in fact, this section here, which talks about the relationship of the state and the military and why countries go to war. So that is the part we will be talking about for theory. Jomini gets taught to American officers today when they are getting their second master's degree at War College. So this is not terribly difficult content, but it is put there at a high level. A government goes to war to reclaim certain rights or to defend them, to protect and maintain the great interests of the state as commerce, manufactures, or agriculture, to uphold neighboring states whose existence is necessary, either for the safety of the government or the balance of power, to fulfill the obligations of offensive and defensive alliances, to propagate political or religious theories, to crush them out or to defend them, to increase the influence and power of the state by acquisition of territory, to defend the threatened independence of the state, to avenge insulted honor, or from a mania for conquest. It may be remarked that different kinds of war influence in some degree the nature and extent of the efforts and operations necessary for the proposed end. In short, what you are trying to do affects what you must do to get there. The party who has provoked the war may be reduced to the defensive, and the party assailed may assume the offensive, and there may be other circumstances which will affect the nature and conduct of a war, as a state may simply make war against another state. A state may make war against several states in alliance with each other. A state in alliance with another may make war upon a single enemy. A state may be either the principal party or an auxiliary. In the latter case, a state may join in the struggle at the beginning or after it has commenced. The theater of war may be upon the soil of the enemy, on that of an ally, or upon its own. If the war be one of invasion, it may be upon adjacent or distant territory. It may be prudent or cautious, or it may be bold and adventurous. This is a translation bit, I think. Bold is going to refer to like a like risky maneuver is probably a better way to put that. And adventurous is not going to be like, oh, we're going on a great adventure, is not what he means. It kind of means you are taking a leap as a state to engage in this conflict. Not individually adventurous. It may be a national war, either against ourselves or against the enemy. The war may be civil or a religious war. So, the first thing I'm going to note here while we're talking about this is the state as a construct is a new idea when this is being written. This is coming out around 1838 originally. So it's after the Napoleonic Wars, after this kind of initial surge of Napoleonic Wars that kind of creates the concept of European nationalism. And you're getting very close to a very specific period of European history that is kind of regarded as the evolution of the modern nation state. And this is the kind of like an early intellectual precursor to some of that, envisioning the state as the principal organization to which you, the citizen, are a part. It is a post-revolutionary France ideal, in a certain sense. So, for example, one of the key developments of European nationalism is the revolutions of 1848. This is kind of in that intellectual tradition and reaching for it. War is always to be conducted according to the great principles of the art. That would be the art of war. But great discretion must be exercised in the nature of the operations to be undertaken, which should depend upon the circumstances of the case. Let's kind of stop for a second and turn this into an MS Paint stream. So, we talk about levels of warfare in military theory. Where's my mouse? Mouse! Oh, there it is. I couldn't see it. We talk about levels of warfare in military theory, and we tend to talk about 3 of them. I don't like that. $72 is too big. Okay, that's probably too small. How's that? So we have the tactical level of war. And then we have the operational. Spelled that wrong. Boop. There we go. It's late. Leave me alone. And finally, we have strategic. Let's pretend I did that in a straight line. So what is tactical? The tactical level of warfare is what you do as a commander to win battles. This is the right flanking, the left flanking, etc., that you do in order to win a battle. The operational level of warfare is taking this set of battles and fighting those battles towards an end that accomplishes a campaign or a set of objectives. It is stringing battles into a larger campaign. This particular notion, when Jomini is talking operational, right? Our operations is not the same thing. Operational level of warfare is a Soviet development, a 1920s, 1930s Soviet intellectual development. It is very much an in vogue thing. If you listen to Commander Macmillan, he will talk about it quite a lot. It is kind of this essential tie of the two together. When Jomini talks about it, he is talking battles tie into a strategy. And the strategic aim of a country is what we're kind of talking about here contextually. What does the country want to do? And why is it doing it? Operational will get you to the what you must do to get there, and tactical is the how. And this has led people to address a lower level priority. The individual and the equipment. So this is the person who talks about the tanks and the crap and thinks they know what they're talking about. And to be fair, what equipment you have and its capabilities can help determine your tactics, and therefore further determine what the operational art is going to be and how those things work together. If I've lost people or you're just totally bored, let me know. And finally, they have added a fifth element up here. Policy. This refers to the choices that a country makes and how it presents itself in order to achieve goals. So, will we buy this fighter jet or that fighter jet? That's this level here. These are not as widely uptook in traditional military theory. I see them more and more being taught these days, but they're there. And that's worth talking about at a future date. This is kind of the framework in which we start thinking. What is Jomini talking about? Where are we sitting? And because of where it's at, we are going to talk chiefly, and we won't finish this all tonight because I just realized what time it is, but we're going to get through some of it. We will talk about chiefly a kind of merging of the strategic and operational. So with that said, let's go on to part 1. No, don't save. That's horrible. Article 1. Offensive wars to reclaim rights. When a state has claims upon another, it may not always be best to enforce them by arms. The public interest must be consulted before action. The most just war is one founded upon undoubted rights, and which, in addition, promises to the state advantages commensurate with the sacrifices required and the hazards incurred. In short, go to war when the gains outweigh the potential losses. Unfortunately, in our times, there are so many doubtful and contested rights that most wars, though apparently based upon bequests or wills or marriages, are in reality but wars of expediency. Particularly at Jomini's time, when you see this kind of merging of republicanism and nationalism and a falling away of the concept of the absolute monarchies. Now, the question of succession to the Spanish crown under Louis XIV was very clear, since it was plainly settled by a solemn will, and was supported by family ties and by the general consent of the Spanish nation. Yet it was stoutly contested by all Europe and produced a general coalition against the legitimate legatee. Frederick II, while Austria and France were at war, brought forward an old claim, entered Silesia in force, and seized this province, thus doubling the power of Prussia. This was a stroke of genius, and even if he failed, he could not have been much censured, for the grandeur and importance of the enterprise justified him in the attempt, as far as such attempts can be justified. In wars of this nature, no rules can be laid down. I contest this. To watch and to profit by every circumstance covers all that can be said. Offensive movements should be suitable to that end and be attained. The most natural step would be to occupy the disputed territory. Then offensive operations may be carried on according to circumstances and to the respective strength of the parties. The object being to secure the secession of the territory by the enemy. In other words, march into the territory that you believe you are owed, and then begin destroying the enemy in such a way that they give up and give you the territory. In an offensive movement, scrupulous care must be exercised not to arouse the jealousy of any other state which might come to the aid of the enemy. It is a part of the duty of the statesman to foresee this chance and obviate it by making proper explanations and giving proper guarantees to other states. Well, Jomini lived through and served in the Napoleonic Wars. And if you're familiar with them, one of the particular highlights is that they often involved coalitions. What would happen is France would get adventurous, Britain would pay people to fight France, and then several countries would get beaten by France, up until that reverse happened, where everyone beat France. They developed a strategy which, oversimplified, perfectly points out is, well, when we see Napoleon coming, we'll run away, and that worked very well for them. They fought everywhere Napoleon was not. This kind of is going to be this last bit, that 2 sentences at the end, is kind of like the psychic memory of coalitions for Jomini. The idea is you want to make your claim and win that claim without necessarily involving a general war. Because if I'm going for a war, for example, to be Prussia, and I march into Silesia and take it from Austria, I don't want to suddenly get England involved fighting against me, because now I have a bigger problem. This idea, the idea of reclaiming rights to territory, is rooted kind of this late medieval concept of duchies and claims. It kind of carried over for people. This, we're going to talk about the next article because I like it, and it's good. Article 2, of war is defensive politically and offensively in a military point of view. A state attacked by another which renews an old claim rarely yields it without war. It prefers to defend its territory, as is always more honorable. But it may be advantageous to take the offensive instead of awaiting the attack on the frontiers. And this is, I think, a good concept to think about. So, like, particularly in this day and age where a lot of people get their idea of war broadly from games instead of actual military, it's easy to get in the Hearts of Iron 4 mindset. So the most basic thing you can do in Hearts of Iron 4 is take all of your divisions and put them on the border of the country you're going to be fighting, and then push the other enemy divisions off because they will also share the border. Here is the reality. There's a possibly apocryphal tale that one of Napoleon's marshals was arranging troops prior to an attack or a defense. And they threw them all up on the border. And they asked Napoleon what he thought. And Napoleon said, "Well, it's beautiful. What are you trying to do? Prevent smuggling?" The idea is that you put and station troops in such a way that they are positioned to carry out operations for a potential war. And that does not necessarily entail putting them all on the border and pushing. There are often advantages in a war of invasion. There are also advantages in waiting the enemy upon one's own soil. So to this end, in this statement, I want to kind of point out, generally speaking, I have found, by looking at military history, that the party in at least a war between relatively even states, the party that wins is going to be the party that's attacked. What generally tends to happen, the party that starts the war and is committing the offensive action attacks, they run out of steam, and the other party takes back the territory or pushes in there, and they don't have the ability to recover the original party. A power with no internal dissensions and under no apprehension of an attack by a third party will always find it advantageous to carry war upon hostile soil. This course will spare its territory from devastation, carry on the war at the expense of the enemy, excite the ardor of its soldiers, and depress the spirits of the adversary. Also, it generally tends to make people happy if war is not happening in their own backyard. Nevertheless, in a purely military sense, it is certain that an army operating in its own territory, upon a theater of which all the natural and artificial features are well known, where movements are aided by knowledge of the enemy, by favor of the citizens, and the aid of the constituted authorities, possesses great advantages. So, in short, it's easy to operate an army in your own territory. You have more readily access to things like information and intelligence. You know the ground. You're able to choose the ground more readily and fight on your own terms. Offensive operations very often occur in such a way, particularly when you're attacking countries, that you don't get to fight on your own terms. The example of this from the Napoleonic Wars is going to be Napoleon's invasion of Russia, where he expects to be able to battle the Russian army and defeat it. And they just retreat and ambush and retreat and ambush and retreat and ambush. Napoleon doesn't get his fight until he gets to the gates of Moscow, and they siege it anyway and burn it to the ground. And by that time, Napoleon's army is so depleted, his supply line stretched so thin, and his ability to forage for supplies so non-existent because of the Russian winter, that the army collapses and Napoleon begins a long retreat back, which he eventually abandons his troops and races off to France. These plain truths have their application in all descriptions of war. But if the principles of strategy are always the same, it is different with the political part of war, which is modified by the tone of communities, by localities, and by the characters of men at the head of state and armies. The fact of these modifications has been used to prove that war knows no rules. Jomini is setting out kind of to prove otherwise, this idea here. Military science rests upon principles which can never be safely violated in the presence of an active and skillful enemy, while the moral and political part of war presents these variations. Plans of operations are made as circumstances may demand. To execute these plans, the great principles of war must be observed. So the principles of war is a valuable concept. Which we will talk about in the context of the United States. I will put here for you if you wish to follow along in chat. That's not it. This is U.S. Army Field Manual 3-0 Operations. The United States Armed Forces follows 9 principles of war. The acronym for this is MOSMOUS. And that stands for Mass, Objective, Simplicity, Security, Maneuver, Offensive, Unity of Command, Surprise, and Economy of Force. So the principle of mass. Mass is bringing your forces together in an overwhelming amount of combat power at the right place and time to defeat the enemy. The next one is objective. Objective is probably one of the more important ones. Every military operation must be directed towards a clearly defined, attainable, and decisive objective. The purpose of war is the destruction of the enemy's ability to fight. Simplicity. The concept of simplicity is that you keep the premise of your operations clear, uncomplicated, and easy to understand so that they are easy to execute. The next one is going to be security. This is a pretty simple concept. The enemy is, you are guarding against the enemy acquiring advantages, understanding intelligence. The idea of this is to limit the enemy's ability to act and to give yourself options in order to act. The next one is maneuver, and this is the putting the enemy at a disadvantage by moving around the enemy and placing your assets in a position to harm them while maneuvering them away from the enemy being able to harm. Next in this is going to be O for offensive. This is the concept of trying to stay on the attack. Seize, retain, and exploit the initiative. Offensive actions are much more effective at ending wars and achieving their objective, which is the purpose of war and objective, the destruction of the enemy's ability and will to fight. And then unity of command is making sure that people understand the chain of command, that they execute it properly, and that each piece of the puzzle is moving in the right direction and by a common objective. The next one is S for surprise. And surprise is attempting to maneuver in such a way that you are choosing when you are fighting as opposed to which the enemy is choosing when you fight. And finally, economy of force. Economy of force is to use only those forces required to achieve the objective. So here is where we're going to stop for the night. Because everyone's watching Sunday. If you like this theory, we're going to be continuing it as we go. But if you like theory, I'm going to do more of it. And tell me you like theory so I know. That being said, I want to wish you all a very good night. Like, subscribe, do all those things. It really helps the channel out. Have a good one, everybody.